The heat bore down like judgment, unforgiving and thick. The wind dragged grit down the town's single road, stirring up the scent of horse sweat, wood smoke, and something older disappointment maybe. Buildings leaned like tired men, sun-beaten and brittle. And into this place walked Eleanor Monroe. She didn't look like trouble, not at first glance. Slim, sun-browned, maybe 30. The hem of her duster was stiff with dust, and her boots had seen more than their share of miles. Her hair was braided tight beneath a weather-faded hat, her jaw set with the kind of tension that comes from long silences and longer memories. She passed the blacksmith, the mercantile, and finally the weathered structure bearing a crooked tin sign that read Dixon's Diner. She pushed the door open. The air inside was barely cooler, filled with the sound of spoons clinking and boots scraping the floorboards. Conversation dimmed the moment she crossed the threshold. She moved to the counter, keeping her hands visible calm. "Water," she said simply. The man behind the counter looked her over. Mid-50s, balding his apron streaked with grease, his gaze sharpened like a drawn blade. "Just passing through." Ellie nodded once. "Don't intend to stay." He filled a tin cup from a jug, but didn't release it. "Name?" She hesitated. "Eleanor Monroe." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A man at a nearby table leaned back, revealing a sheriff's badge hanging from his vest. "Monroe." "That you, who lit the fire in Bitter Creek Court, said arson." Ellie met his eyes. Court was wrong. He snorted. "Still makes you a felon in these parts." The bartender yanked the cup back. "We don't serve felons." Ellie's throat tightened, but she didn't argue. "It's just water." He jerked his head toward the door. "Then drink from the river." She nodded once and turned to leave her fingers curling around the strap of her satchel. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, the sunlight hit her like a slap. She blinked against it, squinting down the road, unsure where her boots would carry her next. "Hey, lady." The voice was small, girlish. Ellie turned. A child stood there barefoot on the splintered planks, no older than 6. Her dress was too big, her hair woven into 2 messy braids. Freckles dotted her cheeks like flecks of cinnamon. "You want to meet my daddy?" the girl asked, clutching a rag doll to her chest. Ellie blinked. "Why?" "He's got horses," the girl said. "And pie." Ellie almost smiled, a rare startled thing that flickered across her face. "I don't think your daddy wants company like me," Ellie said. "He don't mind," the girl replied. "You look like someone who needs pie." The child extended a small, dust-streaked hand. "I'm Lila." Ellie looked at it for a long second. Then, without knowing why, she took it. And that's how she left Red Rock, following a child with a rag doll and a promise of horses and pie toward a place she hadn't meant to find. The wagon creaked and shifted as Ellie climbed aboard, settling onto the weather-worn bench beside the girl. Lila looped the reins around her small hands and gave the horse a tap with her heel. The mare stirred forward with a gentle grunt, and the town of Red Rock slowly began to shrink behind them. Ellie sat stiff-backed, one hand resting on the worn strap of her satchel. She scanned the land ahead, dry scrub low hills stitched with sagebrush and the occasional cottonwood cast in long shadows. The trail curved gently west away from anything familiar. Still, Ellie stayed quiet. She'd been taught that silence was safer than curiosity. "You always ride around picking up strangers?" she asked, her voice dry as gravel. Lila shrugged. "Only the ones who look like they ain't got nowhere else to go." Ellie almost laughed. Almost. But something about the girl, her surety, her ease, unsettled her more than the heat or the road. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the clack of wagon wheels and Lila's soft humming. A hawk passed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. "That ridge up there," Lila said, pointing to a slope covered in pine. Daddy says the trees listen better than most folks. Ellie didn't answer. She just kept watching the landscape, her senses sharp. She'd ridden into ambushes before. She'd walked into traps dressed like Mercy. But the girl beside her didn't seem afraid. She swung her legs and waved at bluebirds. The air cooled as they climbed. The light shifted from searing to golden. Finally, tucked into a fold of hillside, Ellie saw a house. It was small and weathered, built low to the ground as though it had learned not to make itself a target. Ivy curled up its sides and the porch slouched slightly under time. One window shutter was missing, but the panes were clean and a faint curl of smoke rose from the chimney. Lila jumped down and ran toward the porch. "Daddy, I brought someone." Ellie hesitated. Her boots hit the ground slow and cautious. The front door opened. A tall man stepped into the frame. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves and his hands were calloused. His hair was shoulder-length dark with silver streaks near the temples, but it was his eyes that caught her. Steel gray. Not cold, just watchful. "You're Eleanor Monroe," he said. "I am," she answered evenly, her spine straightening on instinct. Lila chimed in. She was thirsty. Dixon's man told her to drink from the river. The man's jaw clenched. "Come inside," he said. "No one gets turned away here." Ellie narrowed her eyes. "You sure about that?" He didn't flinch. "We've got a roof food, and the storm's coming tonight. You can stay in the guest room. Just for a bit." She studied his face for the catch. There wasn't one, not yet. So Ellie stepped through the doorway into the scent of pinewood ash and something else she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, or something pretending to be it. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't look back over her shoulder. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the outside world. Inside the house was modest and tidy. A stone hearth held a low-burning fire casting long orange shadows across wooden floorboards. On the mantel rested a row of well-worn books and a tin-framed photograph of a smiling woman. The scent of pine resin leather and old coffee lingered in the air. Marshall Blake stepped past Ellie without a word, his boots thudding softly. He moved like someone used to doing things himself. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, then turned back toward her and held one out. Ellie didn't take it right away. Her eyes lingered on the photograph above the fireplace. "Your wife." He nodded once. "June. She drowned 3 years ago. South Ridge. I'm sorry. She was careful. Grew up around water. Still happened." Ellie accepted the mug. The ceramic was warm and her hands grounding. She sat at the edge of the table, not sure if she was company or something to be managed. Across from her, Marshall stirred his drink without sipping. "I don't ask questions," he said. "That's good," she replied, "because I don't have many answers." Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. From outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutter. Lila skipped into the room, her cheeks flushed. "Can she stay, Daddy?" "Just till the road's dry." Marshall looked over at Ellie again, his face unreadable. "A couple days," he said. "After that, you'll have to move on." Ellie gave a slight nod. "Fair enough." Lila raced outside, chasing the dog into the yard, her laughter echoing off the trees. Ellie stood slowly and wandered the edges of the room. She noticed the small details: the rocker draped with a hand-stitched quilt, the cup and saucer near the stove still turned upside down, dustless, as if waiting. "You keep it the same?" she asked. Marshall's voice came from behind her. "Some things don't need changing." Later, as twilight bled into the trees, Ellie found herself by the window. She watched as Marshall saddled a bay mare in the paddock. Lila sat cross-legged in the grass, threading wildflowers into a circle. The girl hummed, lost in her own world. Marshall moved with quiet intent, brushing the mare's flank with long strokes. Something about it all felt suspended in amber, untouched by the judgment she'd carried from town. Still, that same judgment clung to her ribs, whispering that comfort was temporary, that kindness had cost. She stepped away from the window. A house, this still, couldn't be just peace. Somewhere in its floorboards, secrets waited. She could feel them like splinters. She had no intention of staying longer than promised. But she also hadn't expected a child's hand to lead her here, or that the eyes of a stranger could look at her without flinching. That night, she didn't unpack. She laid her satchel beside the guest bed, boots still on, and stared at the ceiling until sleep took her. Outside, the wind howled against the roof. But inside the ranch house, Ellie dreamed for the first time in years of water, of fire, and of the sound of a little girl laughing in the grass. Morning came with the crisp scent of wood smoke and dew. Ellie rose early, her body still tuned to years of hard beds and earlier alarms. She crept down the hallway, past the creaking floorboards and the framed photograph of June Blake, whose soft smile followed her like a memory not ready to be buried. Outside, Marshall was already in the barn, feeding the livestock. He didn't say a word when Ellie joined him, just passed her a bucket of feed like it was the most natural thing in the world. She took it without comment. They moved in silence, working side by side, the scrape of shovels and the rustle of hay louder than conversation. By midday, Ellie wandered out back to sweep the barn's loft. Dust floated in golden shafts of sunlight through the slats, swirling with each step. As she moved an old crate, her boot knocked loose a floorboard near the back corner. Curious, she knelt, wedged her fingers under the warped plank, and pulled. Beneath it lay a small cloth-bound book tied with a pink ribbon, faded nearly white. She turned it over in her hands. It was a journal, its spine cracked the cover soft from wear. She hesitated, then opened to the first page. June Avery Blake, 1882. The entries were quiet at first. Observations about garden rows, recipes for cornbread, Lila's first word. Then came something that caught Ellie off guard. Marshall gone overnight again. Town business. House feels colder, but not just from absence. Another, heard footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, nothing. Still, I locked the nursery window. Ellie's breath slowed. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. The tone changed. The unease grew sharper, less about loneliness and more about fear. One final entry, dated just 2 days before June's death, stood out. Saw the rider again. Same horse, same hat. He didn't wave, just watched. There was a knock last night. Not Marshall's. Too slow, too heavy. Lila has a fever. I'll ride for medicine at dawn. If I don't return by sundown, tell her I sang to the trees. Ellie shut the book slowly. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but recognition. She had known women like June, women whose instincts were ignored, who disappeared and were remembered only in whispers. The coroner had said accidental drowning, but Ellie had seen bruises dressed up as fate before. She tucked the journal into her coat and stood. That night, while Marshall read quietly by the fire and Lila dozed with the dog at her feet, Ellie stared at the quilt on the rocker, the one June had made. She looked at the upside-down teacup, still spotless, still waiting. The house wasn't just filled with memory. It was filled with silence, carefully kept silence. And Ellie Monroe had learned a long time ago that silence always had something to hide. Ellie rose before dawn the next morning, dressed quietly, and slipped the journal into her satchel. The house was still the kind of stillness that creaked softly in corners and seemed to listen when you moved. Outside, fog clung low to the fields, and the air smelled like wet cedar. She saddled a chestnut mare from the barn and rode toward town with purpose in her chest and questions burning under her ribs. Red Rock's town hall sat like a forgotten relic at the edge of Main Street. Its paint had long since peeled away and its windows were clouded with dust. She tied her horse outside and stepped through the heavy oak doors into a corridor that smelled of mold paper and neglect. The clerk's desk was unoccupied, but a dim light glowed in the back archive room. She followed it. Behind a stack of boxes sat an older man with wire-rimmed glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He looked up and blinked. "Well, I'll be Eleanor Monroe," he said, not unkindly. "Didn't think I'd see you back in this building." Ellie's expression was tight. "I need to see the council records, the sealed ones, land acquisitions from the last 5 years." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not supposed to show those." She reached into her satchel and pulled out the letter she had found folded into the back of June's journal. June Blake tried to submit this before she died. The old man squinted as he read, then slowly sat up straighter. "She came here. I remember. Said something about forged maps, council pushing out landowners to claim federal acres." Ellie nodded. "My family's land was one of them. My father was beaten. I tried to fight back. They called it arson." He sighed and rose to his feet. "Come with me." They descended into the lower archive, a storage room lined with metal cabinets and the kind of thick air that hadn't moved in years. He unlocked one marked Zoning and Legal 1880, 1888, and pulled a heavy folder stamped Confidential, Municipal Security Review. Inside were maps, dozens hand-marked in red ink. County boundaries shifted mysteriously. Complaints filed and stamped dismissed. Signatures from men Ellie remembered testifying against her. And then there it was, her arrest order, filed by the town's chief prosecutor, signed by the municipal council. And among the signatures, Marshall Blake. Ellie's breath caught. "He was counsel," she whispered. The old man tapped the margin of the document. "See this," he said, pointing to a faded ink stamp. "For council eyes only. Restricted review." They used these stamps to rush approvals. Councilmen weren't allowed to read the details, just verify the file existed. Ellie's jaw tightened. "He signed my name into ruin, without even knowing it." "Same with others," the man said. "June was digging. That's why they buried her." Ellie stared at the paper. Her hands trembled not from fear this time, but rage. "It was all a lie," she whispered. "Every word they used to damn me." The clerk reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. "She left this. Told me to give it to someone who could still make noise." Ellie took it slowly, as if it might vanish. Her fingers closed around it with purpose. She wasn't a ghost anymore, and the silence in Red Rock was about to be broken. By the time Ellie returned to the ranch, the sun was low, casting long amber light across the hills. Her mare was lathered from the ride, and her coat clung damply to her shoulders. The sealed envelope from the archive lay pressed against her chest, tucked inside her blouse, warm from her skin. As the wooden fence came into view, so did the outline of a small figure running down the path. Ellie, Lila's voice, rang out like wind chimes in the still air. She threw her arms around Ellie's legs, her face beaming with pride. "I told the chickens you'd come back. They clucked twice. That means yes." Ellie knelt to hug the girl, the force of it catching her off guard. "Smart bird," she murmured. From the porch, Marshall stood silently, his figure outlined in the soft dusk. He didn't call out or come forward, he just watched, his eyes unreadable. The front door stood open, and from inside Ellie caught a faint whiff of warm cornbread and pine smoke. A folded blanket lay across the rocker, and a neat pile of firewood sat by the hearth. Not a greeting, not quite, but something that felt dangerously close to welcome. She stepped inside, and the door eased shut behind her. That night passed without sleep. Ellie lay awake in the guest room, the letter still unopened in her lap. Her eyes traced the ceiling beams while her thoughts tangled like vines. When morning came, she joined Marshall and Lila in the kitchen. She said little, her movements measured. The weight of the truth pulsed just under her skin. Over breakfast, she finally broke the silence. "Did your wife write a journal?" she asked. Marshall looked up slowly from his plate. "What? June. Did she keep one?" He set his fork down. "Not that I know of." "Why? She ever say anything about being watched, about someone near the ridge?" Marshall's jaw tensed. "What are you asking me, Miss Monroe?" She held his gaze. "The night she died, you were in town, weren't you?" "I was." "Anyone see you? Anyone confirm that?" His eyes darkened. "You think I hurt her?" "I think someone did," Ellie said softly, "and I think she knew it was coming." He stood slowly. "You found something." Ellie nodded. Her words. They stood locked in silence, too much unspoken between them. Just then, Lila rushed in, holding up a crown of wildflowers. "It's for Mama," she said proudly. "I'm going to put it by the creek." Marshall's eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. "I'll come with you," he said, his voice quiet. As they left, Ellie remained by the hearth, staring at the place where June's photograph still hung. She wasn't sure if the house was haunted by its past or still protected by it, but she did know this whatever had been buried was rising again, and she intended to uncover it all. The days that followed unfolded like pieces of a puzzle Ellie didn't remember picking up, but now couldn't put down. Each afternoon, after chores were done, and Lila napped or wandered down to the stream, Ellie returned to the barn loft. She carried June's journal with her, tucked inside her coat, its worn pages marked by dried flower petals and faint pencil sketches. But her search wasn't just about memories now. She was after proof evidence that what June feared wasn't just imagination, and that Ellie's past had been twisted by men who counted on no one looking too closely. She moved quietly, carefully. The Blake Ranch held secrets in its corners behind loose floorboards, inside forgotten trunks, beneath layers of dust. In the study, an old writing desk creaked as she opened it. Most drawers were empty, save for the lingering scent of cedar and the faint ghost of old smoke. But when she tapped the base, her knuckles echoed against something hollow. She pried it open and found a false bottom. Inside was a bundle of yellowed papers tied with red string. Her breath caught. Among them she found a sealed envelope, thick and pristine, despite its age. Her hands trembled as she turned it over. The name, printed on the front in tidy type, stopped her cold. Mayor Horace Dean, Red Rock Township. Ellie opened the letter slowly. The handwriting inside was familiar June's. Every line was firm, urgent. "I write not for favor, but for justice. A group of landowners, led by Garvey Vennett, is manipulating federal township maps to seize land from families unable to afford legal defense. The Monroe property was among the first. If this is ignored, others will follow. This is no longer legal. It is moral. And if you stay silent, you are complicit." At the bottom, below June's signature, was a legal stamp, and next to it, in unmistakable ink, Marshall Blake. Ellie stared at the name. Her name. Their names side by side. Signed before June died. Before Ellie's arrest. Before her father's land was taken. It hit her like a hammer to the chest. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the letter breath shallow. So it had been real, all of it. The pain, the fire, the accusations, the prison bars, the silence. She hadn't imagined it. she hadn't overreacted. They had taken everything, and they had used Marshall's signature to do it. Ellie stood the letter pressed to her chest, like a scar no longer willing to be hidden. She moved to the window and looked out across the field. There he was, Marshall leading a mare back toward the barn. Sleeves rolled his pace slow and steady. For the first time, she didn't see the man who'd offered her shelter. She saw the man whose pen had condemned her. She packed slowly her shawl, her satchel, the journal, and the letter. On her way down the stairs, she paused at the hearth where Lila's rag doll sat curled near the rocking chair. She straightened its yarn hair gently. Then she slipped through the back door and into the rising wind, walking fast and low, the truth tucked close to her ribs. She didn't look back. Red Rock's town hall loomed like a relic from a half-forgotten war. Ellie stood before it with dust on her boots and fire in her chest. This was the place where everything had started and where it would begin again. Inside, the air was thick with stillness and mildew, but she moved through it with purpose. The old clerk was still there, bent over records like a man married to memory. He looked up startled when she stepped into the back archive. "You again," he muttered. "Didn't think you'd come back this fast." Ellie held out June's letter, the one sealed for Mayor Dean. I found what she meant to send. And now I need every file that ties Vanette the council and this ranch together. The old man adjusted his glasses, then nodded grimly. "Follow me." They descended into a storage room filled with rusted cabinets and decades of secrets. He unlocked one marked Legal and Zoning, 1880, 1888. The file he pulled out was thicker than she expected: maps, redlined land revisions, dismissed complaints, council memos. And there it was again, her name. Ellie traced the ink slowly, her hand shaking. The arrest order, the signatures, one by one all stamped and verified, and again Marshall Blake's name affixed beside a faded seal. But then the old man tapped the margin. "See this," he said, pointing to a barely visible stamp. "Classified, for council eyes only." Back then, he explained, certain filings were marked for security purposes. Meant no one on the council actually read the content, just signed it as a formality. Ellie stared at him. He didn't know what he was signing. The man gave a slow, reluctant nod. Not unless he broke the seal, which would have made it inadmissible. They did it with a dozen properties. Yours was one. Ellie sank onto a nearby bench. The weight of it all rushed in grief, relief, fury, clarity. He hadn't known. But that didn't erase what had happened. "I wasn't crazy," she whispered. "They made me look like a criminal for trying to keep my land, my family's land." The clerk placed another envelope into her hand. "June left this too. Said if anything happened to her, give it to someone who could carry it further." Ellie nodded, eyes misting. She tucked it into her satchel with the others and stood. She wasn't finished. She was only just beginning. The sun was sinking low when Ellie rode back into the ranch. Lila saw her first, sprinting down the path in her bare feet, arms flung wide. Ellie barely had time to dismount before the girl wrapped herself around her waist. "I knew you'd come back," Lila whispered into her coat. "I told the birds, and they nodded." Ellie laughed a broken, grateful sound. "Well, I couldn't let them down." On the porch, Marshall waited. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, but Ellie felt his gaze. He was searching her face, maybe trying to guess what she now knew. She stepped inside. The scent of rising bread greeted her. The fire was crackling. A second plate sat covered on the table. Not a question, not an apology, just a place, still open. That night, she didn't unpack, but she didn't leave either. She sat beside the fire, a journal in her lap, a letter pressed to her thigh, and a little girl asleep in the next room. For the first time in years, Ellie didn't feel like she was running from something. She felt like she might be running toward it. Spring arrived like a soft breath, warming the edges of red rock and coaxing new life from the once hardened soil. On Carr Ranch, the cottonwoods stretched with fresh green, and the creek behind the barn gurgled louder with meltwater. But the greatest shift wasn't in the land, it was inside the house. Ellie stayed. She no longer moved through the house like a shadow, no longer waited for footsteps behind doors. She rose early, kneaded bread in the cool morning light, and helped Lila with her letters at the kitchen table. Marshall didn't speak much more than before, but his silences softened. The walls that had once seemed to watch her now felt like they listened. She started small, an old storage loft above the barn, unused and filled with broken tools and bird nests. Bit by bit, Ellie cleared it out. Marshall cut boards. Lila brought nails and questions. Together, they built a room not for sleeping, but for growing. On the wall, Ellie painted the words Carr Hollow Learnin' Corner in crooked, careful strokes. The town's children came slowly at first. A pair of brothers whose mother had died the winter before. A shy girl who didn't know her alphabet but knew the names of every bird in the valley. Some brought sticks instead of pencils. Others brought nothing but curiosity. Ellie taught them with chalk patience and the same fire that once nearly cost her everything. At night, she sat near the hearth, her fingers tracing the worn pages of June's journal. She wrote her own notes now in the margins and the blank spaces between June's sentences. Not erasing, just continuing. Then, one bright afternoon, while tidying the front room, she spotted Lila hunched over the table with crayon-stained fingers and a fierce look of focus. The drawing she held up was lopsided but vivid. "It's us," she said proudly. "That's you and Mama June. You're both holding up the house so it doesn't fall." Ellie blinked hard. Two women, one gone, one staying, holding the same home in a child's imagination. Later that week, Ellie entered the sitting room still dusting flour from her apron and froze. Above the fireplace, where June's photograph had hung alone for 3 years, now rested 2 frames. The first remained June, her eyes distant and full of quiet grace. But beside it was a new photo. Ellie laughing wide, her hair wild in the wind, Lila perched on her shoulders like a sunbeam. Beneath both, on the mantel, sat a brass plate. It read, "Home lit by her, kept warm by her." Ellie stepped back, overcome. Her fingers trembled, not at the photo, but at the choice it represented. Marshall hadn't replaced June. He hadn't chosen between them. He had honored both. She turned slowly and walked onto the porch. The sky above blushed gold and lilac, the cottonwoods rustled with a breeze, and the scent of wild rosemary lifted from the earth. Behind her, she heard Marshall step into the doorway. His boots creaked softly on the floorboards. I didn't know if it was the right thing he said. Ellie's voice was quiet. It was. He looked at her, the lines around his eyes deepened by time and regret. She was the flame. Ellie turned to face him. "And I'm the one who kept it alive." No one said the word love. They didn't have to. The house, the girl, the land, all of it whispered the word for them. 1 year, to the day after Ellie Monroe first stepped onto the Carr Ranch with dust on her boots and a past heavy on her shoulders, she stood inside Red Rock's courthouse once again, but this time not as a defendant. Legal guardianship is hereby granted to Eleanor Monroe. Blake, the judge, declared the final thud of his stamp echoing in the wood-paneled room. The paper in Ellie's hand trembled just slightly. It was real. It was done. That night, back at the ranch after Lila had bathed and brushed her teeth, with a clumsiness only a child could manage, Ellie tucked her in. The girl stared up at her with wide, sleepy eyes. "Are you really my mama now?" she whispered. Ellie nodded, throat tight. "Yes, baby, I always was. Now it's just on paper, too." Lila smiled, rolled over, and whispered to her doll, "Told you." The months leading up to that moment had been filled with work not just on the land, but in their hearts. Marshall had converted the old tool shed into a small storefront they called Car Hollow Goods. Ellie sold honey bread wrapped in linen, along with jars of wild chamomile rosemary and dried calendula she'd harvested by hand. Marshall raised hens and bees, bringing eggs and amber jars of honey. He crafted shelves, sanded cedar, and painted a sign that read, "Made from the land for those who stay." People came, not in crowds but steadily, some for goods, others just to sit under the cottonwoods and breathe in the quiet. The ranch no longer felt hidden, it felt rooted. One evening in October, Marshall led Ellie beyond the fields to the base of a grove of old pines. The air was sharp with resin and dusk. He knelt beneath the largest tree, brushing away pine needles to reveal rows of rosemary. "She planted it here every spring," he said. Said it kept bad spirits out. Ellie knelt beside him. She was right. Marshall turned something small in his hand. A leather string, worn smooth, threaded through a silver pendant in the shape of a flame. The words, engraved, were simple. "Not passing through anymore." Ellie touched it with trembling fingers. "You made this." He gave a soft shrug. "Had help with the silver. The words, those were mine. I was blamed for fire," she said, voice catching, "but maybe I was just meant to carry light." He pulled her close, slow and certain. No rush, no wait, just presence. Later that week, Marshall hung a new sign on the front gate. He carved it himself, polished it until the grain shimmered gold in the light. The words were burned deep. "Here rests no ghost, only love that stayed." Sometimes, when the wind was low and laughter danced from the windows of the old ranch house, travelers passing by would slow down, not to ask directions or seek shelter, but just to glimpse something real. A light in the windows, a girl chasing chickens, a man mending fence while a woman read beside the fire. She had walked in as a stranger, broken and named by lies. But she stayed as a mother, a partner, a flame that never dimmed. Because not all love stories are born in ballrooms or bound by words. The truest ones are carved in pine wood, whispered in kitchens, and begin with a child who looks up at you and says, "Want to meet my daddy?"